Productive Disruption is a podcast presented by Rhodes Branding, spotlighting bold and innovative ideas that have the ability to reshape K-12 education. If you're looking for actionable ideas about how to operate and innovate your school, you've come to the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of Productive Disruption. I'm your host, Molly McGowan-Gorsuch, and I'm the Director of Client Engagement at Rhodes Branding. Joining me today is Alicia Hughes, an expert in organizational leadership in the virtual space, having built a virtual public charter school from the ground up that continues to thrive on collaboration and relationships today. And today, South Carolina Connections Academy is the largest public charter in the state of South Carolina. And Alicia is using her experience to empower and inspire others seeking to lead in the virtual space through consulting, public speaking, and more. Alicia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks, Molly, for having me. I am excited to be here.
So first off, can you give our listeners an overview of South Carolina Connections Academy, where you served as executive director for 14 years? Like when and why it was established?
So it was started in 2008, so long before many people even knew what virtual education in the public sector was. Very small school that I was fortunate enough to join with in 2010 as a social studies teacher. And we started real small. It started, I would say, mostly for people in the homeschool association and just looking for other options. But very quickly, we were inundated with a plethora of students looking for any alternative to the traditional setting. And so word of mouth is really how we grew in the early days. When I first started, we were 800 students, K through 12, grew very quickly my first couple months up to 2,000 students. And then that growth just continued, leading us to being the largest, not only charter school, but public school in the state of South Carolina.
And I know you've talked a little bit about how you were able to personalize learning to those student needs. You talked a little bit about, how initially it seemed like some student groups, and now it kind of expanded to sort of a broader group of students. Can you kind of expand on that?
Sure. Because every student is different and every child is different, we attracted students that had a need beyond the traditional setting. And so students that wanted to advance very quickly sought us out because they knew they could work at an accelerated pace. We attracted students that were behind in their learning because the instruction could be tailored to their needs as opposed to sitting in a classroom, not understanding the material, feeling like they were behind. We had students that had a wide range of activities outside of the school building that they wanted to be able to participate during the normal school day and work on lessons at night. And so we serve the needs of students that are not getting those needs fulfilled at the traditional school setting.
So how has that really intensely student-centered approach really benefited the school community?
Well, it's a wonderful opportunity for our staff, the staff, to be able to tailor their teachings to the needs of each child. You know, in a traditional classroom, it's really hard to do. If you've got 30 students sitting there, you try to teach to the majority and then have small groups breaking out into smaller groups to help. But in the virtual space, you can set intentional time to meet with kids one-on-one or in special groups to help them with exactly where they are, which is magical and which is what every educator wants. They want to teach children where they are. And so the flexibility of the virtual world allows us to do that at a very high level. And that has allowed us to be tremendously successful.
Now, with that flexibility, I'm sure also comes some challenges, right? Because we talk a lot here at Rhodes Branding about that importance of relationship building, but that's got to be extra challenging in a fully virtual space, except even more crucial, really, for that staff and student engagement. So how did you navigate that?
Oh, that was a big challenge right from day one, right? Like, you can easily disappear in this world right here. I can click off this webcam and X out of, my school building and go walk around the block or play video games, and staff can do the same, right? And so the leadership team, when I first joined, we put a high priority on relationships. We knew that Peter Drucker's words, culture eats strategy for breakfast, we knew that we had to implement a strong culture built on relationships if we wanted to be successful as a school. And so all the norms and expectations for staff were relationship-based. We were going to have meetings like you and I are having right now, Molly, and we were having these kind of meetings long before Zoom, long before COVID, where we would meet together with webcams on and be able to engage with each other and truly see and focus on each other. And so building that foundation first with the staff and building that culture and those expectations quickly translated into staff-student relationships. So the same principle. When I meet with a student, I want to see you. You want to see me. When I'm individualizing instruction, I want to do what's in the best interest of the child and not what's in the best interest of curriculum, lessons, etc. And so that approach, I know, is what led to such great successes at the school. Relationships first, relationships matter, even in the virtual space. And you're right, it is harder, right? Like, I'm not going to pass you in the hallway on my way to first period or bump into you in the parking lot. We have to create spaces just like this where we can have those connections and collaboration. And then when you put emphasis on that, then it becomes as natural as breathing, right? Like, it just becomes a part of what you do, and it goes into every single decision that you're making, and every single policy and procedure you roll out comes back to relationships.
So what are some examples of those ways that you said you created those, well, not physical spaces, but yeah, those new spaces, and like adapting communication to build those relationships? Because it's not just the students, right? You also have to keep in touch with the parents. So how did you adapt that in that virtual space?
Well, and it's twofold, right? You have to have your staff engagement. And so creating fun opportunities to connect virtually, serious opportunities, creating PLCs, professional learning communities. So we wanted to take what a strong culture looks like in brick and mortar and translate it right into here. So having meetings, but with webcams on and at certain times on certain days, so staff knew, okay, I've got to be there. I've got to be, present with my webcam on. But then those team building opportunities, you always have staff going out after work for happy hours or, meeting in the morning for coffees. And so we would provide opportunities for those connections. We would have coffee talks at 8:30 on a Friday where people could just come in and we're just going to shoot the breeze and chat in the chat pod and, get to know each other on that level. We also have face-to-face opportunities. South Carolina isn't large of a state in that we can all meet in Columbia. And so that's a relatively central location for most with just a couple hours drive. But we also would do things within the larger cities, having opportunities for staff to get together for lunch or, encouraging them to get together, to work together from each other's homes. And so, again, trying to take what is in the brick and mortar setting that builds culture and implement it creatively in the virtual space. The same is true with students, right? We would have tutoring sessions, after school tutoring sessions, or clubs and activities, chess, and we have the the gaming, right? Esports teams, where students could compete. And we had a Comic-Con. Where students were getting dressed up on camera and, they were just like this in this type of a call, but they could see each other and interact, and there was a speaker. So again, just trying to replicate whatever's offered at brick and mortar in this type of space and give as many different opportunities to attract as many different interests as possible.
And that had to have morphed and grown over the years, right? As you're like, all right, we've got this. Let's build upon this. So I guess thinking about it, if I'm wanting to start a virtual school or if I'm interested in it, what were some of those changes that you saw that you were able to improve upon, and like those relationship building strategies that ultimately became part of the culture? What was that growth like, and I guess some of the takeaways and best practices you have?
Sure. So when we first began, or when I first joined, we were trying to do all relationship buildings face-to-face still. Because in the early days, we didn't have this capability. We could call into a conference line or we could chat, through an instant messaging platform. But this type of technology was still in its infancy. So we relied heavily on face-to-face and tried to offer opportunities scattered throughout the state for students, but constantly meeting together in Columbia as a staff. And that takes a toll on people who have to drive, 2 hours one way, 2 hours back. For students, there were some that just could not travel to locations, even, locations within their hometown. And so we continued that even once we had technology such as this. We continued with that model for a while until we were like, what are we doing? Why are we continuing to try this when it's not working? Let's look outside of the box and do something a little bit differently. So that was our emphasis, where we went from face-to-face to more of this. We still value the face-to-face opportunities, and we still have those, but just not relying only on one thing, having a variety of options. The other thing that really grew with us were the offerings, right? Like, it just used to be, let's just have a social hour for our students. But then, like I mentioned, we got Comic-Con, we got esports. And so really expanded beyond, okay, guys, just come in and hang out and chat, to, well, these kids like chatting about this particular topic. Let's give them something surrounding this topic to really entice them to participate and engage.
It's like you're just building that same structure as if you were in a brick and mortar. So what were some of the other challenges that you discovered that were unique to a school leadership in a virtual space? And what advice would you give to other K-12 leaders taking things virtually?
I think the hardest thing is still the virtual engagement piece. Despite all the policies and procedures around that, you are always going to have students that disappear, that are hard to reach, that don't pick up the phone, that don't answer the emails and the texts and things like that, that don't take advantage of the opportunities. And so coming up with ways to engage the learner is still, I believe, the number one challenge. Putting an emphasis on it definitely helps make it more successful, but coming up with ways to really engage learners that you do not see every day. And helping them understand the importance of this type of communication and relationship building. That is a challenge we continue to fight this day. The other piece is more outside of the hands of the leader, but just something to keep in mind, is that there are requirements that come way beyond the school leader's purview, right? Like the State Department says, you've got to give standardized tests to your students if you're a public school. And so there are those challenges of meeting state and federal requirements that just don't fit so perfectly into the virtual space. So always thinking creatively, always using all the resources, and knowing that there are going to be things that come down the line that are very difficult to implement in this space, but you have to think outside of the box and figure out ways to make them happen.
So you've mentioned the creativity a few times. Can you give some examples of like the real creative ways that you've made that work, and some of the, especially, when you say you're really wanting to emphasize that relationship building, and some of those creative ways that you've seen happen either, now or in the past at the school?
So I'll tell a story that if any of my staff members are listening to, they will laugh at. We, a few years ago, had to give this very important 11th grade state assessment. And historically, our 11th graders did not come out to take this test because it didn't affect their grades. It was simply like a participatory grade or a participatory test that the state required us to give all 11th grade students. And so I was high school principal at the time and said, y'all, we've got to, our results on this are abysmal. We are not getting these students, out to take this test. And there are a plethora of reasons why we didn't get the students out, but let's be honest, it was 11th grade. They're 17 years old. They are at home all day long. They don't see the need. Nobody's telling them they have to go. So they're just like, forget it. I'm not going. And so I was determined we were going to have as close to 100% participation as possible. Historically, we'd been in the 50%. And so I was like, we've got to make this happen. And so we started what was called a calling, I can't remember the name now, but it was a calling drive where every single one of the high school staff members were calling nonstop the 11th graders. And we had 1,000 11th graders this year. And it was a 1-week window. And I said, every single one of these 11th graders is going to get a phone call, and you're going to talk to them, not just a voicemail, not a text, not mom answered. You are going to speak to them and make them promise that they're going to come to this exam. And when they get to the exam, we are going to give them a little Cersei of some sort. I don't even remember what we gave. Probably like a pencil. I don't even remember at the time what the treat was to get them there. But we are going to do this calling blitz, and we are going to get them out to the test. And the staff thought it was crazy. They're like, Alicia, there are 1,000 kids. There are 70 of us, and we have got all this other stuff to do. And these 11th graders, they don't pick up the phone, and they don't call us back when we leave. This, Alicia, you've been here a long time. And I was like, we're all doing this. And we did. We reached every student. We spoke to every student. And I believe the participation rate was 96 or 94%. So it was a huge win. It was outside of the box thinking. It seemed impossible because of all the reasons why. But it just had to be done if we wanted the students to understand the importance of attending the test and getting them out to the site. And so those are the kinds of things that you have to think outside of the box on and quickly, a lot of times, implement in a short period of time and get all hands on deck to make those kind of things happen, especially when in the virtual space you're up against all the challenges that don't face brick and mortar counterparts.
That campaign reminds me a lot of, higher ed. They'll make those calls. I mean, I get it as an alum, but there is a call to action, right? And they're trying to reach you. And it is definitely a more personal ask. I'm not getting a phone call from a recording. I'm getting someone who's actually in the college of study that I went to, and they're trying to make that connection. So I love that example. So now I know that you are bringing your wealth of knowledge in the virtual school leadership to others through Sparking Up Leadership Consulting, correct?
Yes, a little sparkle.
You've got some sparkle for sure. And I know that as part of this, you just gave a TEDx talk in Austin, Texas about educational ideas worth spreading. So what were some of the best practices that you were excited to share there? And I know something you mentioned before was about facilitating these interactions successfully.
And that, the TED Talk was all about the building relationships and how we have done it virtually. And one of the things in that TED Talk that I discussed was the very simple directive that whenever people were meeting, they would meet like this with webcams on. That type of decision are the decisions we made that seem simple, right? Like, that just seems simple, but changed trajectories because we were, again, looking at each other in the eye, seeing, hearing each other. We couldn't multitask. We couldn't, go for a walk because our webcam wasn't on. We had to be in the moment and present. So when everything comes back to relationships, the decisions around how you get to the end goal tend to be a little bit easier, right? Like, okay, we're going to do this together. We're going to collaborate. We're going to meet. We're not working in isolation. So that was a big part of the TED Talk. And then the other piece was how we interacted with students. Kind of like what I just described with the not giving up, not just calling and leaving a message. You didn't do your math assignment and hang up the phone and never call that student again, right? It is the constant seeking of engagement, the constant chasing in some cases that we're not giving up on you just because you're virtual, just because we can't see you. We are not going to just leave one message. We're not going to just send one email. We are going to continue until we connect with you, until we've built that relationship, and you know that we are here because we care about you. So it's really just about that consistent approach and the focus on relationships.
Now, so you mentioned having the webcam on, which is huge. And I know that that is something that a lot of schools kind of had to deal with, during 2020 and 2021. We're saying, like, keep those webcams on. But What are some other expectations that you have created or you see necessary for creating in a virtual workspace, whether that's in K-12 or beyond, for professionalism?
It is response time on just about everything, right? And so setting clear guidelines for, if I send you an email, I need you to respond in XYZ amount of time, because there's nothing worse than sitting in the virtual space going, did they get my email? Did they understand my email? Do they know what I need? And so responding, even if the response is, I need more time to think about this, or I need to do more research before I can give you an answer. So response time is huge. And at South Carolina Connections Academy, we had different levels of responses. So if you sent me an instant message, I was expected to respond within 20 minutes during my working hours. If you sent me an email, I had 24 hours. And so there were different levels. And then there were different guidelines for when you should use each type of communication, which is huge. But you don't, don't send me an essay in an instant message where I'm going, I can't even read all the words because I'm scrolling, and it's going to get lost. Those are for quick, communications. What time is the meeting this afternoon? Or, what was that link that you shared last week? Can you send it over? Quick communications come through that platform. Longer needs come through email. And anything dealing with conflict should be done in this type of setting. And so setting expectations for response time, how you use the tools at your disposal is huge. And that is probably one thing that is the most important, is the communication norms and expectations.
What were some various tools that you found helpful in kind of differentiating those types of communication and then upholding those expectations?
And do you mean like for the monitoring of it, or you mean just the collaborative and the communication?
Yeah, the collaborative, what did you use to communicate? Because I heard instant message, obviously, in emails. Were there any others?
So we've adopted a newsletter platform called S'more. It was just one of many used over the years for more global and informational sharing purposes, right? To kind of streamline so people would know where to look. And, this is the top, it's going to look like this is the middle. We had internal communication systems within our platform for personal student information. You don't want to put those things in email, so we had to use our internal system. Google Docs were fabulous for all things collaborative. If we're creating a policy together, let's all get in here and share it together. And we use Screencastify for lots of recordings. Whenever I didn't mention that, but there are sometimes when you have to explain things, right? Like, especially if you're in a leadership role, like, hey, this is the new policy on XYZ. And so also putting into words and verbal what we're sharing out was key, because there can be some confusion and some questions that maybe don't come across so clearly in email. And so trying, again, kind of like being a good teacher, touch all the modalities of learning, let people hear it, let people see it, let people touch it and feel it, and all the things as best we can do virtually. We try to reach all modalities.
And now I realize that these expectations are for really any virtual workspace, because that's becoming the new norm. What should implementation look like for organizations of various sizes and levels of experience operating in the virtual space? Because I know you've talked about how, you and others are pretty well versed in that, but then others are coming to this space as there's a lot of unknowns for them. So how can leaders in a virtual space navigate that and setting up those expectations?
It always, for me at least, comes from collaboration, right? So I think getting your team, if you're just starting in the virtual world, or if you've been in it a long time and you're like, this is not going the way I want it to go, is getting the team together to talk through, and starting with a simple brainstorm in a shared doc, whether it's Google, Canva, or whatever your favorite mode of communicating virtually is, to brainstorm. Where are areas that we're struggling as a virtual organization or a virtual team? Where are we doing great? So starting there, having an open and honest, transparent conversation this way, not through email, not in the Google Doc, but rather, hey, what can we do better? How can we improve? And then creating norms and expectations together that everyone can agree upon, or at least commit to. They might not agree. They might not want webcams on. There were plenty of people in our early days that were like, I am not turning on that webcam. And that's okay. You can disagree. But once everyone has committed to the norms, upholding them and encouraging each other to uphold them, and then putting them in your handbook and your policies and procedures for the future. But as a general rule of thumb, just starting together with some collaborative exercises, talk about, okay, what can we do better? How can we get there?
And that's something, when you mentioned the handbook, that's something that I guess is part of the onboarding process too, when you're hiring a new teacher educator for that. Having those virtual expectations in the handbook. What can you, just off the top of your head, are there any of you that come to mind that you remember putting in there?
Yeah. Well, the response times were huge. Those always went in with when you should respond. We had a childcare policy prior to COVID, which was if your babies or children were at home, they needed to be cared for by someone besides yourself. Like you could have a nanny or a relative or spouse, but you could not be the primary caregiver. And then COVID came along. And so we went back to the handbook and we said, well, nobody can help that their children are at home and we're going to be flexible. So we changed the handbook to just get your work done kind of thing, get your work done and, do what you can. Then we tried to tighten back up to say, if your child's at home with you, we don't need to see them on webcam. We don't need them to be in the background. And so that was one that kind of morphed over time. And we have slowly returned to if you are at home with your children, you need to be working during your working hours to give all the attention to the students and the staff as possible. That was a big one. And general background, right? Like you would think that it would be common sense, right? That your background should be distraction free and, neat, and you shouldn't be in your bed or on the beach. You should be, in a professional setting of some sort. And that wasn't always the case. And so I will tell you, Molly, it sort of was building the plane while in flight for a long time, the handbook, in that, oh, shoot, we didn't realize that was going to be a problem. Let's make a policy for it and get it in the handbook. So as things popped up, they continued to get added as we grew.
But you're right. So many of those things that even, are kind of new for everyone except perhaps folks like you who'd already been doing this for a while when COVID, oh yeah, your background. Ooh, is that the place you want? Do you want people seeing that? And who's walking behind you?
Yes. Yep.
So, before we move on to the last question, do you have any other insights for folks who are either thinking about working in a virtual setting, a virtual school setting, or starting a virtual school setting?
It all comes back to being yourself, I believe. So many people I've seen that I've worked with and known over the years get on this camera and get into this space and feel like, well, I've got to be so precise and so rigid and so not myself, not true to me, because whether it's because it's being recorded or because it's written and I've got to make sure it just sounds so perfectly. And I feel like people almost freeze in the virtual space because of, I guess, the longevity of it, right? Like this recording is not going away, right? Like, so fear of not being true to who they are, true to themselves, or being authentic and transparent, being very robotic and very scripted, because this is going to live on for eternity, perhaps. And so, and the same with the writing of the emails, this can come back to haunt me, or if I write it this way, people might, take it that way. And so maybe it's a curse, maybe it's a blessing, have always been true to who I am and have said what I want to say and acted with you, Molly, here today, just like I would if we were standing in my front yard right now. And the same with emailing and communication. And so that is my biggest piece of advice. To always be true to who you are, be yourself, shine, sparkle, or, be the quiet bookworm or whatever it is you want to be, but be true to yourself and authentic and transparent and let people in just like you would if we were sitting right next to each other.
That's great advice, not just for anyone in a virtual space either. So we end every podcast with the same question. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing you would fix in education?
Oh my goodness, Molly, this is something near and dear to my heart. I'm a history major at heart, right? That's when I started with social studies education. And when you look at the history of public education, you look back, it really has not changed much in 150 years. And yet, here we are with all these new opportunities and all these possibilities, infinite possibilities. I mean, I think about AI right now. I'm so excited by the offering. And you have people that are like, don't let AI in here. Don't. And so I wish people in the education sector, and I'm not just talking about educators, I am talking about like the government and the people that are making the decision, would start to take those risks and think outside the box as to ways we can truly help every child and not continue to do things the way we've been doing them essentially since public education began. It is so frustrating and so sad. And that is why you see educators leaving the profession in great numbers because of the challenges that continue to arise and aren't getting fixed that we continue to struggle with. So I would love if I could wave my magic wand to have people be more risk-taking and open to different possibilities in order to fix what we have.
Sounds like, just pushing the envelope and taking a few risks here and there to see what works, and instead of just, consistently doing the same thing over and over again. I like the idea of always trying to improve. So thank you, Alicia, for your time. If folks want to catch up with you, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Alicia Victoria Hughes, and Sparking Up Leadership is my website, Sparking Up Leadership. And I'll give my email too, because again, I'm transparent and an open book and here for it all. So it's alicia@sparkingupleadership.com. So I would love to talk to anyone about virtual education or virtual best practices. It is my passion. It is something that is near and dear to my heart. So happy to help in any way I can.
Well, awesome. We will go ahead and drop those into the show notes for anyone who wants to follow up. And once again, thank you so much for joining me, Alicia Hughes. This has been an episode of Productive Disruption.
Thank you, Molly. My pleasure.